Hey there, this is John Gustafson from John's Table Tennis Training. Today we're going to talk about kind of a fun way to evaluate your game, look at your training, possibly look at your racket that you're using, and get a better feel for how you might proceed to make your training be more productive. Anyway, last video we had covered going into a tournament, expecting the unexpected. This week, over the weekend, I did play in a tournament in Athens. One of the good marks of a good tournament is that you don't get as much unexpected stuff. There's, at least from the running of the tournament, it was very well run. There were a couple little issues that were resolved quickly. As far as I could tell, everybody really had a good experience. Whether they won or lost, I don't think you could fault the tournament and how it was run. I was a little tight on time, but made it, and overall, really nice tournament in Athens, Georgia. Congratulations to Sean O'Connell and the whole Athens Table Tennis Club. They gave me a shirt here. I got that, very nice shirt. Since I had given them one, I guess I was rewarded with one. Honestly, theirs looks a little bit better than mine, but anyway, I wear it proudly. Nice club in Athens. Good job, Sean. But there were some unexpected things for me in the tournament. We had people playing their first tournament, so they had some things they weren't really expecting, which is inevitable when you play a first tournament. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what kind of players you're going to play. Had some people that won some, maybe they weren't expecting to win. They had some who didn't win but are going to learn a lot from it. I probably put myself in that category. I broke even. I won 4, lost 4, but definitely came away with some good knowledge on how to approach the next tournament, and that was really one of my main goals. I was close a lot of the time and can see a lot of ways I could make some progress. All right, so a few things you can learn that will help you with your training, a good way to evaluate your game. And this is one of the things that kind of hit me right after the tournament was what's been my approach? What am I trying to do? How am I trying to get points? And is my equipment what I need to make that work? Am I training the right way? Am I approaching matches the right way? Exactly what do I want to do? And this will work for you, and it's a little bit of fun to kind of look at it. What I do is break down your game into four things that are part of every time you play. And I go back to these a lot. I think I've mentioned them in other videos. And it's speed, spin, placement, deception. Are you trying to win your games primarily through speed? Or are you trying to win them through deception? Do you have the right racket that complements that type of game? And how do you really sort that out to be the most efficient player that you can be and make the most of when you play, so you maybe win some of those close ones? So here's the way I look at it. The easiest way is to break down some of the players that I saw in Athens and tell you what I think their approach was and why it worked, why it didn't work, and you probably recognize yourself somewhere in here. First one, I'm going to talk about the winner of the tournament, the winner of the Open Division, 2300 level player, Emmanuel. I had the pleasure of playing Emmanuel. I significantly lower rated than Emmanuel, and got a few points, had my moments, but for the most part was really overpowered. And what you're going to find with an awful lot of players when you get over 2200, 2300 and above, their entire game is going to be so solid that it's hard to find any real weaknesses in it. But even at that, Emmanuel's game was not primarily built on deception or placement, it was mostly built on speed and spin. And I'll give you a equation. I don't know if I just made this up or other people have said this before, but I think when you combine speed and spin, speed plus spin equals power. And if you're going to be overpowered, that's the way it's going to happen. Not only were shots getting past me completely, if I did get my racket on it, really, really tough to keep the ball on the table. I'm a decent blocker, and still, if he got the right shot, particularly his forehand loop, really tough to keep it back on the table. So this is going to happen. I'm not upset that I didn't beat him. I didn't expect to, but it was a learning experience for sure. So, in my opinion, it almost didn't matter where he placed the ball. Obviously, he hit the table a lot. There was a lot of spin that would pull the ball down on the table, and the overwhelming speed of his racket just brought the ball down faster than most people can handle. There are certain shots that are just going to overwhelm you. There's players that could beat him. I'm sure his 2300 he's not a professional, but you probably run into this, and I think there's some limitation on what the human brain can react to with speed, and there's different ways of dealing with this. Players could back up, players could attack first. There's ways of winning those matches. Just in my case, there was no way that I was going to win it. But if you kind of took a pie graph for players, I think what you'd see was every player should have a big portion of that pie. If you're breaking it down into speed, spin, placement, deception, a good portion of it, regardless of your style, has to be associated with spin, because the whole game is about spin. So even if you're playing with anti-spin, you have to account for the other people's spin. It's not easy to play with a game with no spin, but it doesn't matter your style. Spin has got to be a big, big part of your game. Like I said, in a manuals game, I think spin and speed would have taken up the biggest portion of the way he plays. He didn't miss the table much, so his placement was excellent, which kind of went along with the spin and his footwork. But honestly, it wasn't that deceptive. I knew exactly what was coming, and it wasn't a deceptive game. He probably didn't feel the need to fool me very much. And that's sort of, he's typical of a modern table tennis player. Get a powerful game and overwhelm your opponent. But there are other ways to play. And so your game may not look exactly like that, and it may never look that way. So that brings me to the player who came in second. This would be Will. Will's good, solid player. I would say his would look a little different. It'd be much heavier on placement and spin. Speed was there, but I also played him and had a very, very close match with him. But in the end, his consistency, his good spin with some dose of speed. It wasn't like he was not putting any speed on the ball at all. It just wasn't quite as overwhelming as playing a manual. So that's a lot of older players, just players that don't play as often. If they can get control with their spin and have excellent placement, that can get you a long way. And I think if Will was trying to learn to beat better players, he'd probably have to figure out a way to put a little bit more pressure on them, actually, with speed. And that was my take on it. His control and spin were enough to beat me in a close match, but again, not a ton of deception there. And that's okay. That's not his game, and he doesn't, in fact, he prefers not to play against long pips players. I was using long pips in most of my matches. I didn't use it in the first match, which I'll get to. But his game is really built around spin and placement, and he should train in such a way. I think his racket complements that type of game, but I think to really move up, he's got to put more power, and that would be tough. It's not always easy to figure out a way to get more power. Sometimes people go for more speed and sacrifice their placement. So, good, solid player, played well, beat some tough players, and that's a different approach slightly, but doesn't have that combination of spin and speed that's going to overwhelm you. But it's a good game. Which brings me to my own experience. I started the game with short pips against a pretty solid player who had a lot of spin, and I was using short pips on my forehand, and came to the conclusion very quickly that my game, without an element of deception, falls apart quicker than I would expected. I've used different types of pips on my forehand. I was using a faster blade, fast short pips on my forehand, and it really didn't help as much as I thought it would. I think this is an example of me making a mistake in figuring out how I get points normally. Definitely not overwhelming anybody with any spin or speed, but I think the fast blade was probably a good idea. I needed an element of power in my game that hadn't always been there in the last year or two. That wasn't the problem. But if you broke my game down, I'd have a decent dose of spin, enough to control the ball, but it comes down to placement and deception and changes of speed. So the speed and spin are not as heavy as placement and deception. That's really my game, and I went into the first match with no element of deception at all, and didn't do so well. Normally I'd been using a racket that I could twiddle, go to long pips on one side, smooth rubber on the other, and with short pips that didn't work nearly as well. So there's all kinds of ways you can, it's not all about the equipment for sure, but you do want to get the kind of equipment, the kind of racket that complements your game. The bigger part of this really, if you've got the right equipment and you've got a good idea what your game looks like and what you want it to be, is train in a way that complements your strengths. We're always trying to build up our weaknesses. You know, if we have a hole in our game, definitely need to work on that. But if your game is built up around one certain way of playing, if you've got maybe you're a short pips hitter, and in order to make that work, you need to work on footwork, then most of your training, or an awful lot of it, needs to be about footwork. Getting back to spin again is, it doesn't really matter, again, if you are a flat hitter or even if you use anti-spin. You've got to have some part of your game where you're going to be able to use spin and use it to your advantage. Okay, so for you got to figure out, is your game primarily about placement, deception? Are you trying to overwhelm your opponents with speed and spin? That's one way that you're going to have to train. You may even have to work to make get physically stronger in some cases to make those stronger shots. So if you want to take a look at maybe a little different approach for your game, think about those 4 aspects of it. How are you trying to get your points? And do you need to change your training? You want to make sure you're using what I call training specificity. This is where you make sure you're working on the things that you actually do. If you're close to the table attacker and you rarely ever back off the table, if you're training a lot backing off the table or chopping or lobbing, but you actually never do those things in a game, they're of limited use to you. You really want to focus in on what are the important parts of your game. For most people, footwork will always be important. I think placement is important. Don't rule that out. Even if you're just trying to overwhelm people, you're going to come across players that are not going to be as easily overwhelmed by your speed and spin. So even if you're playing a power loop game, you're going to have some emphasis on placement. Okay, so I think that's a little interesting evaluation of a way that you can look at your game, and me breaking down some of the players of the tournament. And there were a lot of other players that were there, and I think they should think about what they need to do for their training going forward. Again, thanks to Sean O'Connell for a great tournament this weekend, and we will be back with you next week for another John's Table Tennis Training. Thank you very much.